Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Amar with ZenMade.
All right. Today, we're going to discuss about weaknesses, founder weaknesses, and how our team are covering up for it. That's right?
Yeah.
Did I say it right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that if folks watching this, like if you're really kind of early on with your company as you're hiring, like at the start, there's a couple of different ways to go about kind of hiring things, or kind of like your approach to hiring, right? And so you can kind of double down on your strengths, or you can use hiring to like cover your weaknesses, right? And like, of course, at some point you are going to have to cover those weaknesses. Yep. But like kind of when you do can kind of like vary and stuff. So
yeah, you were saying something interesting in the past episode when we barely touched on that. You said, or one of the past episodes, when you said something like until 5 people and your strength and something like that. You remember what I want to hint toward?
Yeah.
You said it better, so go for it.
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact like numbers are, but just think of this as a mental model or like a framework. So essentially, usually when you go from like 0 to 5 or 0 to maybe 10 employees in a company, like approximately, the founder's strengths are going to be the company's strengths. So when you look at you and me, when you look at like the beginning of our journeys, right, the first couple of years, ZenMade, we were always much more focused on the sales and marketing, and like the product was good enough, but it wasn't great. Whereas you spent a bunch of time building a great product, and your company was known for having a really great product, but it took you guys some time to kind of get the sales and the marketing down, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and we're still not there yet, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, we're still not there on the product side, right? But essentially from 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, the founder's strengths are going to be the company's strengths. And as you scale beyond that and you go from 10 to 20 employees or 10 to 30 employees, then what happens is the founder's strengths will oftentimes become the company's weaknesses. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. In a lot of ways, people tend to actually be more systematized in the places that they're not as strong within a company. That if you're an engineer, you want to have more process and more systems in place to deal with support and to handle the things maybe you're not as good at. But if you're, a solo developer, maybe you're a little bit lax on writing like clean code and creating a code base that's actually designed to be taken over by multiple engineers, like as you're scaling. I don't think for you, I think you've got enough experience.
You're right. Even me with 20 years experience on coding, when I'm coding alone, then it's a bit more of a cowboy, type mentality. You cut some corners because you know what corner you can take, but you gotta pay it later one way or another, right?
Yeah, exactly. At some point that comes in and will begin to slow you down. And that's just another hurdle that we have to cover when we're building our companies, right? That I definitely struggled to replace myself on the sales side. That support, it was easy to get support in place because I'm not great at support. So it was very easy to hire someone that was better than me, right? Like anyone is probably better at support than me, right? But when it came to sales and actually, getting people to try the software and to overcome the objections and to get them to sign up, I found it very, very challenging to find people that could actually, do that job, right? And so, for a while there, it was a weakness.
I would say those weakness and strength are sort of easy to assess because we're talking about different, how would I say that? Support, code, marketing, sales, those sort of
kind of departments, but I know what you mean.
That's the one. Yeah, exactly. But I'm also thinking about weaknesses, for example, I tend to forget very quickly small trivial detail stuff that I'm not interested in, or that is not vital because I deal with so many information. I have to I have to concentrate on just a few of them. So an example that is very often is that I would very much often don't remember exactly. So where we at, give me the context. It's I always sort of start conversation like that. And so my team became very good at, giving me the context and putting things in place. So I can get this visibility that I don't necessarily have because I don't remember everything by hand. So I tend to prioritize my ability to obtain the same conclusion based on the same information, if you see what I mean. So I don't always remember the conclusion because I trust my ability to sort of like come up with the same conclusion if I get the same data, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
That's sort of like part of my weakness. Like I won't remember necessarily what we discussed or the conclusion of that. So I always ask you like, oh, can you give me some context or remind me what we talked about, and then I came up with the same conclusion kind of thing.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because I definitely have that in quite a few places. So there's like an entire document that the team has now like written up that all new team members are required to read. That's just on working with Amar. Right. And it's like a 2-page,
awesome.
like it's a 2-page Notion doc that talks about like my tendencies and like how I like things to be like delivered. Because, I've always thought about it as, Arun and I initially were essentially like the talent in the company. And so every hire in one way or another was designed to make me and Arun more productive. And so now we've taken that like further. And so, yeah, very similar like to what you were saying is I have a terrible auditory memory, right? That we can like talk about various things, but if like we ultimately like come to a decision on something, I may remember all of the little things that kind of led up to that decision, but then not be able to recall which way we actually decided on something. So how we've solved that, and then the problem there is that I don't really like writing as much. Obviously, I like talking, right? So what we ended up doing is we now have it so every time we have meetings with the exec team or really any of the marketing teams or any of the department teams, we have a dedicated team member who takes notes on those calls, right? We'll take a transcript and we'll like edit it down, but then we'll give us, here are the to-dos that were agreed upon and here are the decisions that were made. And then I get those notes into my inbox, usually a couple of hours after the call. And I can just look at the top of that inbox or top of that email, and I can see exactly what we decided to do. And so that's so valuable in exactly the situation you were saying, that now I can look at last week's marketing call notes, look at what we decided, and then jump into the marketing call. And I know like kind of where we're at and everything. The other one would just be managing up, right? That's something that all of my team members have to do, right? That if I'm essentially in charge of leading something, it oftentimes is not going to happen, not because I don't want it to happen, but because I have so many things that are going on and I'm constantly making decisions across every single like department, like in the company, right? And I try to I empower the team to make their own decisions, but they'll still make the decision, move forward with it, and like run it by me like after it's already in motion, for example. And so one thing that all the new team members learn is like, hey, like if you're talking to Amar and you guys decide, okay, like we're going to launch the Zen Made podcast, he's probably going to like give you to-dos and he's going to have to-dos like of his own. It's on you to essentially become the boss at that point and to chase Amar to get those to-dos, because too many people are like, oh no, like they're on his to-do list, he's the boss, I'm not going to bother him. And it's like, no, I have way too many to-dos on my to-do list. If you don't follow up with me, it doesn't get done.
Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. I say, especially at some point in development, we had stories, but they were not getting reviewed by me at some point. I was like, well, where are we with those stories? And they say, well, we're waiting for you to review them. It's like, well, your goal is to get the stories merged in staging or like in production or whatever. So obviously, you're letting the ball down if you're not, busting my balls for actually getting it done, right?
Yeah.
Because I got all the things, so they have to, sort of like compete for limited resources. I sometimes envy them, like, because they have like one tiny sort of responsibility type of like, oh, it's just coding, so they can do like 100% of their time pretty much coding, and like, and I have like to deal with like so many things, like, oh yeah, there's some some on the floor, and it's like, it's okay, I'm not gonna pick them up because I got like 60 other like to to play with. If it's important, then you're gonna come back with it, right? So you're right. I think it's very important to tell to your directs how to actually interact with you and what how to make it work for you, right? Because everyone is working differently. Like not everyone needs to be reminded, or not everyone needs to so like I jokingly say like I have the memory of a goldfish, right? For those sort of like small things, like I don't recall them. So they have to remind me, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we have that with the like feedback as well, right? As like we encourage like all team members, you know, to be providing feedback to me and stuff like that. And then what we also have is like, hey, like, you know, it's like it's a different company culture. You may not be used to like to saying these things. If you have something that's like drawn to your attention that, you know, you don't want to say like directly to me, you can always go to Chris, and then Chris is like the one that's like in between. And so Chris has called to my attention where like, you know, there was a point in time where he messaged me and was like, hey, you know, like
no one
the
wants to
support team
talk
is
to
kind of
you,
complaining. Yeah, well, that was
Yeah.
essentially what it was from the support team, and like it makes sense in hindsight. But
I
what it
wouldn't be
was
surprised
that
if
it
I
was
hire a CEO that everyone wants to go to the CEO, because I will hire a CEO that is way different than me, of course.
yeah, exactly, right. You'd want to hire someone that was like a people person or whatever, that
That's
would like
right.
that would like balance you out or whatever. But yeah, in that specific situation, it was that I had finally like actually stepped away from support. So we had 3 team members that were now handling support, and I might come in there 2 or 3 times a week to check support and to check on things. And so what happened was every time I was coming in, I was only pointing out negative things, right? That I was only essentially going like, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, right? And of course, like my intent was very good there. But Chris was like, hey, like the team, like, you know, doesn't really want like to interact with you, like, you know, because there's no actual like positive feedback here. Like, you know, can you spend a little bit of time telling them what they're doing well, you know, like kind of in between like these things. And some people go like, oh, like I shouldn't have to coddle my employees that way. But the truth is like that impacts how people feel. And it doesn't matter whether it's like, I shouldn't have to do that. The truth is that it's going to make people miserable if all they hear is like, is criticism. And so that was something that like I took on board. And that was something that was very easy to turn around and to actually like fix. But, you know, that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have some of those systems in place for, and the team having the comfort to go to Chris to then talk to me about it, right?
Yeah, that's a really good example of, you know, architecturing your company to sort of like manage this imbalance or, you know, or weaknesses, you should say. It's funny because some weaknesses are sometimes strength and some strengths are actually weaknesses depending on what level of your company you're at, you know. There's a typical, you know, saying that what gets you there won't get you there kind of thing. You know, and I find it very, very true. There's a lot of skills that I had to learn, and I'm still not good in it, you know, in all the skills in order to make the shift from individual producer to actually just being able to lead multiple people who produce. And it's not always easy, of course. What other examples do we have of some of our weaknesses that people are covering? Because the another, I would say, another trap. I'm not sure if this is a trap. Like I mentioned, like depending on what level and so on, is hire people just like you. So I think it will magnify the sort of weakness on one end. It will get things faster on the other hand. So, you know, there's always like a balance to get here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's actually a pretty challenging one, because for me, it's like I want people that are like me to a certain extent, but then also very, very different in significant ways. So, I mean, the example for me that comes to mind is I tend to just get very, very like abrasive, right? That I get very, very defensive, and I know that that's the case, right? Like someone comes in and says ZenMaid sucks. My response is not going to be, why do you think that? It's going to be, you suck. Right, like that's pretty much like my like,
I'll do the other one.
like
I'll be curious as to, oh, what makes you think so? You know, it's like my curiosity.
No, I've gotten better with that in terms of like the curiosity, but like the initial instinct or like the initial reaction is still like, you know, fuck off, right? Like maybe I want to understand your opinion, but like I don't want to hear from you again if like that's how you're going to kind of open things, right? And so like literally, it sounds bad, but like literally we have
question
like a term.
Question to you on this one, Emma. I don't think I'm the type of guy who only gave prize, and I don't think that's a shocker to you, right? But I must have then criticized, ZenMade in the past, although I don't recall like one specific example of it. I never recall for, however, that, you sort of like went back very like off, F you type of thing.
It's probably like the way that like that it's said, and also like the intention, right? That like you and I have been friends for a long time, and I think that you and I are both like we both have very strong personalities, and so when we like first met, like there was probably a little bit of like a tension there because we both had a tendency to speak our minds, and there was probably like
I loved you from the first time, honestly.
Yeah, no, that was kind of the thing, right? But you can see how like if you and I had maybe interacted on like a Facebook group without having known each other,
that's like, very true. We could have clashed right away, because I'm also like very
exactly.
Yeah.
And so honestly, what it comes down to with you and with pretty much like all of my friends, but I know that you always have my best interests like at heart, and that when you're criticizing ZenMade, you're not criticizing ZenMade, because like you want to see us fail, or because you're trying to upset me, or anything like that. It's because you want what's best like for the software. And so oftentimes when I'm talking about someone going, oh, like ZenMade sucks, they're like oftentimes they're not even users of ZenMade. They're just like other users of like House Call Pro that are just telling other maid services that we suck. Yeah, right. But like oftentimes it's something like that where they're essentially saying that because they're trying to actively hurt like the company. And so at that point, it's just like, I consider them just like an enemy of ZenMade, right? Of like, if you want to publicly express that opinion that our product like sucks, and you're going to actively like hurt our company, like, and there's a huge difference between that and I tried ZenMade, I experienced a bunch of bugs, it didn't work for me. That's completely fair. But you have a lot of people that are that are a bit more. I mean, I've been abrasive my entire life, and we've been running the company for 8 years.
You're so easy to troll.
Exactly. And I know it. But one thing that we do have internally though is it's like the term like within the ZenMade team is, oh, can someone like unamarify this, right? And it's because of like the tone that I will tend to take in written communications, like when I'm upset. And so that's actually one of the biggest weaknesses that I have, that I've surrounded myself by like amazing people who like will not only just like completely rewrite these things of like, I'll go like, hey, like you're completely in the wrong here. Like this is 100% like user error, and you're blaming us. You're doing like blah, blah, blah. And like Lara will come in and be like, hey, thanks so much for like for the message. I understand that you're frustrated. So let's take a look at how you're actually like going through this thing. I see here that you might not be doing this correctly. And she just will completely like rewrite the thing. So it says exactly what I said, but just like 1,000 times like more polite, right? But then like we even have like Maria on our team who like, she's one of my most valuable team members, but honestly, I have no idea what she does or like how you would even kind of like title her essentially. And so in these sort of situations, I go, hey, Maria, we've got an upset customer, or like somebody's pissed off at me, or like attacking me personally.
She's good at de-escalating stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah, she jumps on the phone with them.
I'm not.
Exactly. Yeah. From the podcast that we that we published on like on firing customers, one issue that we're actually going to have is like the customer that I'd mentioned from this weekend that just went off on social media about us. Our entire team is like, screw this person. We don't want to support her. We don't want to help her business to be successful. She can go like work with someone else. We asked Maria to de-escalate the situation, and she went from like kind of like yelling at Maria about like the entire issues that ZenMade was like having, because Maria recorded it on Zoom so our technical team could take a look at the problem. And by the time they jumped on a second call, now her and Maria are like BFFs, and Maria's like, yeah, I don't think that she's going to leave ZenMade. And I'm like, no. She doesn't want to leave ZenMade. She's going to leave ZenMade because the rest of the team does not feel the way that you feel about this person, right? But like that's like someone that is essentially on the team to just like protect me from being me, right? Because being me
Interesting.
has gotten us this far, and it's a lot of the reason that we are successful, right? Like me being able to ignore these things and to have like a thick skin and to just like continue on with this stuff where other people would have quit because of what people were saying about them. That's what's like helped us to be successful, but it doesn't help us to be successful anymore. And that's where the team comes in.
And it's a good point. I think what's very important for me is when you hire, you don't have to hire people that are exactly like you, but at the same time, you have to be careful they share the same value. Like, for example, we have three big values, which is you have to understand, you love understanding, you're curious, okay? That's not something I can teach. I can't teach someone to be curious. Right. So you have to have it. Otherwise, you just can't come and work with us. The second thing is you have to have a bias toward action. You're not someone who, you have to be someone who do things. Otherwise, that doesn't work here. That doesn't fly. And then the last thing is you have to love giving and receiving feedback, and if you don't do any of those three, I think you're wrong fit. No matter what, you may actually cover some of my weaknesses or, improve some of my strengths. It just wouldn't work. And I think this clarity really helps, hiring. So when you hear like hire people who are not like you to complement you and so on, I don't think you should trade on what is really your core values. And I think that's very important that you keep those core values. Otherwise, it simply just wouldn't work, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing I want to say is when you're going to work, some people, you may hire people to sort of cover your weaknesses, but they may actually not be able to, or they won't be able to work with you one way or another. And I think it's fine. It's like they can go and shine somewhere else, right? It's like as founders, especially at the, new founders or beginning, like we're going to suck at managing, and they're like, it's fine. But some people will thrive under our management and some people won't. And I think that's okay. There's a tendency to think like, oh, well, that person doesn't work well, but I didn't give them, all the chances for them to succeed and so on. It's like, yeah, but, the other person did work well. So, hire more of those people and less of the other person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's two, important point for me when it comes to, hiring and maybe covering our weaknesses. I don't necessarily see as covering our weaknesses my primary motivator for hiring at the moment, because I have like a very clear view on what our core value is. So if you fit those core values, chances are you're going to shine at QuickMail. If not, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to find yourself miserable, and either you're going to leave or we're going to ask you to leave, either way. In terms of my weaknesses, I think the best way that you mentioned at the beginning is clearly letting them know how it is to work with me. Like, how should you manage up? I think that's super important, because right away that helps them, giving them the tool as to saying like, this is what I like. Like one of the things I like to say, for example, is that I don't care being right. And I honestly don't. What I do care about is the company is right? That we take the right decision. And so when you're conversing with me, saying like, oh, I won't say anything because he's right, is not going to help me. So I'm going to have to find people who actually are more likely to say like, Jeremy, I really think like that. And then we have like, a conversation about like, no, I think like that. No, why that? And, sort of like explain back and forth kind of thing until we think like, you know what, actually, yeah, this is the best thing. Let's do it this way. And I think that's okay. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, I'm not sure if this is a weakness or a strength. Like, as founders, usually we have a pretty strong opinion, or like we are vocal about like, this is how it should be done. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have created a company, right, to start with. And I think it's important to sort of like cover that with having some balance in, in other people who actually interact with you. I think that's one of the way I would make sure I cover some of my strength, which is actually a weakness as a company, like having a strong opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the guiding principle that we have is because you were saying that like you don't care about being right, you care about like the company being right. Now that's oftentimes like an important one. I'll definitely have times, and I think we had talked about this on a conversation a couple of days ago, where like there are definitely times where I'm just like, this is probably not in the best interest of the company, and like I'm going to like to do it anyways. But I do try to be very like upfront about that, and like it is one of those things where it's just like, look, like I'm the boss. I know that this is going to like impact us, or it's going to affect our revenue, and like I'm going to do it like anyways. So it's not like it's not like a denial kind of like of that. It's like acknowledging that. But the principle that we always follow is do what's right for the customers, right? That we've brought the thing is like if the customers win, then eventually we win, right? But one thing that I don't know if this will I feel like you might maybe disagree with this, maybe not, but like the whole thing is like the customers are always right. The customer is not always right. And
Oh,
that
say
for
it
us is
again. Say it again. I heard the same thing.
the customers are always right, but the customer is not always
Oh, I
right.
see. With the S.
Right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the plural
Interesting
to
spin
me is
here.
what's really, really important, because we have lots of people where it's like, look, we get that you're having a bad experience with us, but jumping on this to like solve this issue, right? Because remember that until recently, we only had like 1 or 2 developers on the team. So if one customer out of 2,000 is having a serious issue, like us putting our one developer on fixing their one problem is not in the best interest of our customers. And sometimes that sucks for the individual like customer, but that's essentially with all of our decisions is we're always trying to figure out what's best for the customers. And then oftentimes, of course, that's taking into account one specific customer, but there are definitely times when we're just like, look, this sucks, but we can't do anything about it. Like we want to fix it, but we're not going to take the development resources to do this right now. And like that's just like, that's the end of it, you know?
Well, that's super interesting because, you know, when I say, you know, act in the best interest of the company and you say act in the best interest of the customers, I kind of like think like, well, it's the customer makes more sense because otherwise you end up with a company like Enron or, you know, those sort of like companies. And this is definitely not, because I was kind of assuming that if the company does well, is because the customers are happy and then doing well, you know, so it's like use it as a proxy kind of thing. It's interesting because Netflix also had that. It's like act in the best interest of Netflix. But they will probably argue that the best interest of Netflix is their customer are happy, and then, you know, they have a good experience and so on. But I can definitely see that if they have like a conflict between should we actually refund the customer or not, and, you know, it's like it's probably going to be best for the company, so they probably would say no refund, even for that should have been a refund, because it's what the right thing to do is, you know, that sort of thing. So I don't know, that's an interesting one, you know, using the proxy of the company as a value generator. But again, that's probably a different podcast. We're digressing here.
Yeah, we could talk about that on another one. Yeah, in a nutshell, though, what I've just found is I found that it's a lot easier for my team to think in those terms. I think for you and I, we're always thinking about the entire company. But when you're like an engineer and maybe you're not thinking about the bigger picture, doing what's best for the customers as like a guiding principle in your decisions is going to be a lot easier for them to make smart decisions than if you just say do what's best for the company and they don't actually have an idea of, you know, that high level view.
Open to debate. I think we should go back to the subject, because this is definitely something I'd like to discuss with you, because I don't share the same point of view.
Okay, interesting. Okay, cool. Let's make a note of it for next week then. I think it'll be a good one. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, me too. That's going to be interesting. But it's nothing new. I think we already had those clashes already in the past, so I'll be curious to explore them a bit more.
Definitely. Nice.
All right,
they're always the best.
Are we done with the, you know, weaknesses, covering your weaknesses with your team, or do you think we left some stone unturned?
I mean, I think I'll just close out kind of like the conversation with just, even though we've talked about this like stuff, like obviously you and I have no weaknesses, that this has just been kind of an exercise in futility.
Man, I wish, but it's interesting that you think that it's not always binary. It's like, you know, one thing could actually be both depending on the situation, right? Being harsh may actually not work in a peaceful environment where, like, you know, government contract type of thing, but it may actually work in a, you know, in a red ocean, you know, type of like swim or die type of approach. So it's always up to discussion as to, is it a weakness or is it a strength, and it may change.
It reminds me of the hard thing about hard things, and the difference between wartime and peacetime CEOs.
Really great book.
Yeah, exactly. When you're at wartime, you know, a lot of things about being polite and all that stuff goes out the door. It's no, like we either
It's
do this
wartime.
or
Yeah.
we're gone, right? Like, and there's no two ways about it. But I feel like if you're building a bootstrapped like SaaS company, there's a good chance that you're essentially in control of whether it's like peacetime or wartime, that you can just take your time growing it. Like I feel like we're constantly like peacetime until there's some blow up on
Wow,
social media,
interesting.
and then I have to go into like wartime CEO mode. I feel like that's another podcast that we can just talk about
It
the next
is,
time.
yeah. I feel like I'm always in wartime, and we need someone else to be in peacetime. So that's
Oh,
interesting.
oh, that is very okay. That's very interesting. I feel like we're always like it's
I'm a war
always
CEO.
peacetime
I'm
and
not a
then
peace
they.
CEO. It's like
Oh,
true peace.
I'm a total peacetime CEO. I'm just like they're like occasionally
Should we
things where I'm like,
switch
okay,
companies for a week?
send the drones.
Send the drones. All right, man. Thanks for the cast.
Yeah, I think this is a good one. So
All right.
yeah, we'll do it again next week.
Catch you later. Bye.